Morning, everyone. Sorry for the slight delay. We had a little bit of technical difficulties. Thank you for joining. Jimmy Bashar with the ISO Stakeholder Engagement Group. We're here today to discuss the latest stakeholder call for the final proposal and tariff language for our 2021 Contract Management Enhancements Initiative, better known as the COMA Initiative. I'm also joined by my colleagues, Jason Foster, who is the lead for this initiative, and today's presenter, as well as Deb Levine from our Infrastructure and Contracts Management Group. Just a couple of reminders before we get going. This call is being recorded, as most know, for convenience purposes. We do ask that the transcriptions not be reprinted without our permission. They will be posted as a courtesy following the meeting. And the meeting is structured to stimulate a collaborative dialogue and engage different perspectives. So we do please request that comments be kept professional and respectful. And please, of course, try and be brief and refrain from repeating anything. And we do ask that everyone please state your name and the company that you represent. And we do have some new instructions for raising your hand if you don't know already. If you dialed in by the phone separately, you would push #2. However, hopefully everyone logged in through the computer interface, in which case you should see a raised hand icon that you should push to enter the queue once we prompt for questions. And Jason, I believe, will be taking questions throughout, so we'll be standing by for those as they come in. We prefer verbal questions, but if we notice any chat, we'll be sure to verbalize those as well after the verbal questions come in. A quick overview of the agenda before I kick it over to Jason and go over stakeholder process briefly. We're going to go over the ISO as an affected system study agreement, then move on to the retirements and repower category. After that, we'll go on to the modification adjustments. And then finally, before concluding with next steps, we'll end with the generator and connection study process agreement effective date. And just a quick note on the bottom of the screen, as you can see, the market quality proposal has been removed from this initiative, and CAISO has kicked off the 2021 IPA initiative. Please see the CAISO.com stakeholder page for details, next steps, and you can find all of the related meeting material there as well. And like I mentioned, here's a brief overview of our stakeholder process. We are at the final proposal stage, as I mentioned. Thank you so much for everyone's feedback up until now so that we were able to incorporate it. We were trying to package this nicely before we take it to the board. So we'll be going over our final changes as well as the final draft tariff language before we take it to the board for consideration prior to our filing with FERC. And with that, I will hand it over to Jason.
All right, great. Thanks, Jimmy, for the introduction. And let's keep this thing rolling. So you can see here that we've completed the issue paper and straw proposal. Go back up one topic here. We have completed the issue paper and straw proposal, as well as the final draft tariff language, and we did post the final proposal paper on November 10th, last week. From here, we do plan to proceed to the December CAISO Board of Governors meeting and seek approval to implement all items proposed in this COMA initiative. We will hold off until after the holiday season to file this with FERC, at which point we would expect a FERC order around the March 2022 timeframe. And then we would see the implementation of these topics occur through 2022. This would include the BPM updates as well as the tariff filings and red lines. All right, diving into our first topic. Just to set the stage here, there is, I believe, 2 slides per topic. I will briefly go through each topic and then pause for questions just to keep things consistent and moving topic by topic. All right, to start this off, the CAISO has introduced a pro forma CAISO as an affected system study agreement. As many of you know, the CAISO is becoming more impacted by projects being developed outside of the California ISO controlled grid or balancing authority, and we're seeking to put in place a pro forma agreement to establish a more clearly defined process, as well as allow for a deposit and study to be in place between those developing or generator units being developed. Vistra did provide their support for this topic. LSA and CIA raised a reimbursement consideration in previous papers and would seek to defer that topic to the IPE process. And then 6 cities did clarify its support for not reimbursing for network upgrades, and then also provided red line suggestions to the Attachment A, or better known as the CAISO as an Effective System Study Agreement. So really the bottom line here is the CAISO's proposal is to simply introduce this study agreement and make it part of the tariff so that we have something to refer to and utilize going forward for these effective system study processes. So in support of 6 cities' comments and red lines, the CAISO did propose and modify the Attachment A in the final proposal to support what 6 cities had commented. So I'll refer you to that to see the specific red lines. Otherwise, the specific tariff language that we're proposing to add would be a new section 14.5 and 14.5.1 to Appendix DD. And I'll pause here for questions. I see, Susan, you have your hand raised.
Yes. I just want to remind attendees on how to ask the question. If you're connected to the computer audio or use the Call Me feature in WebEx, you may enter the question queue by using the WebEx raise hand icon located just above the chat panel. You'll hear a beep tone when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name and question. If you're just on the phone line and not using the WebEx audio, please dial #2 on your phone to enter the question queue. You'll hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name and question. I'm unmuting your line, so please go ahead.
Oh, hi, Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, hi, Susan.
Okay, hi. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that LSE and CIA didn't seek to defer the reimbursement issue. We actually supported reimbursement, perhaps with some kind of demonstration that the project would be serving CAISO load, perhaps through a pseudo-tie or a PPA for the reimbursement period. So we didn't actually, we were okay with deferring it to the IPE, but we certainly didn't seek that.
All right, Susan, thanks for that clarification. Just misworded that in the presentation. Appreciate that.
Thanks.
I do not see any further callers in the queue as of now.
Okay, great. Well, with that, let's keep moving. I just want to check in. Okay, the slides are moving. All right, so for retirement and repower topics, the retention of interconnection service, the intent and the proposal was to clarify that customers will retain interconnection service rights concurrent with the deliverability retention rights that currently exist today. And that right is 3 years from the date of retirement or the point at which they stop generating. Stakeholder comments were generally favorable and supportive. Vistra supported the topic. LSA and CIA were seeking some clarification around the meaning of what construction means and some of the terminology that we utilize around the 3-year and the repowering requirements around retaining deliverability and of course, interconnection service rights at this point. And the retention of interconnection service rights, just to be clear with everybody and transparent, is this is not a tariff language update. All of the updates here would be identified and updated in the BPM change management process during the implementation of the POMA initiative. So just to clarify, Section 6.134 of the BPM for reliability requirements does outline the deliverability retention rights for generators, and then Section 12 of the BPM for generator management outlines the effective date and some criteria and guidelines for the when the 3-year period starts and what that retention period refers to. And I'll pause here for any questions.
As a reminder,
Okay.
you can click on the raise hand icon just above the chat panel to enter the question queue. I do see a caller in the queue. Please go ahead, your line is unmuted.
Yeah, hi, Susan Schneider again. But I just wanted to say, again, for LSA and CIA, we were not seeking so much the meaning of the term construction, but meaning of the term actively engaged. I think there were some situations where just putting in an application to enter the queue, for example, was sufficient to retain the interconnection service and also deliverability. And in some cases, you actually did have to turn shovels of dirt. So we just thought that that particular term ought to be better defined, and are happy to wait till the BPM process though to do that.
Okay, sounds good. I did make a note of that actively engaged language. And we will look at that in the BPM change management process, certainly.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
I do not see any further callers in the queue as of now.
All right, great. Let's keep rolling. All right, another topic in the retirement and repower section, the repower study plan timeline. Currently, the tariff defines the requirement for CAISO and the PTO to tender a draft study plan for the repower process within 10 days of the receipt of the interconnection request. And the CAISO is proposing to extend that 10 days and be more specific about when the timeline begins. LSA and CIA appreciated the support and inclusion of their previous suggestions. Vistra further suggested that the CAISO consider including timelines around when, around the validation process to ensure that customers don't remain at risk for extended validation reviews and turns. So with that, the CAISO is proposing to change the 10-day response requirement to a 30 calendar day response requirement from the date that the interconnection request package is deemed complete or valid, I should say. In response to Vistra's comments about the CAISO including specific response times, just to again be a bit transparent here, the CAISO is working on some internal practices and procedures to ensure that these timelines are better maintained. We didn't feel it necessary to put more specific timelines in the tariff, but we will certainly entertain ideas and timeline responses in the BPM for generator management in the BPM change management process in the future. And I'll pause there for any questions.
Thanks, Jason. I don't think there are none. We're good. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jimmy. All right, and then the CAISO is also proposing some more administrative type changes to Section 25 that apply to the repower language. There were no further comments on this topic, and really to break it down in simple terms, let me go back here. The CAISO is proposing to add Section 25.1F, and that would clarify the affidavit requirements and bring some more clarification and separation about the repower language versus the modification language versus the need to submit a new interconnection request in the Q cluster study process. I'll pause here for any further questions.
I do not see any questions in the queue.
Okay, great, thank you. And then moving on to the modification category, the topic of aligning a project's commercial operation date with a power purchase agreement that was subsequently executed. Just to give a quick, brief overview of this, currently TPD allocation group 3 projects are prohibited from modifying their commercial operation date beyond that date, which was proposed in the original interconnection request. And the CAISO is proposing or has proposed to modify that language to allow group 3 projects who do ultimately receive a power purchase agreement or execute a power purchase agreement to align their commercial operation date between the interconnection request and that power purchase agreement. And there was some, Susan and LSA and SIA brought up some very good points and pointed out a number of different tariff and BPM sections and various language, more specifically around the word automatically as it relates to the COD extension alignment with the PPA. Further, there was references to modifications such as this that are, quote, approved without an MMA. And LSA and SIA were seeking some clarification around that. So I point to the paper for more specifics here, but just in general terms, I'll point out that GitApp or Appendix DD section 6.7.5 does allow a project or provides the language and guidance, or maybe better worded would be the rights for a generating facility to align its COD with the power purchase agreement. And then further than that, section 6.7.2.4 of Appendix DD outlined that a permissible technological advancement, or PTA for short, provides that mechanism for a project to align its COD with the PPA. So kind of then on to the terminology of automatic. When a power purchase agreement is executed and a request is made through that PTA or permissible technological advancement, the COD is technically automatically approved. The key here is the COD is approved. However, we can't automatically approve an in-service date or sync due to the fact that the PTO may have started work or started engineering that would prohibit the project from automatically shifting everything out. Further, it may impact other projects, or there's a number of variables that can play into fact here. With that, though, a project or generating facility can request that the COD in-service date and sync be extended out to the respective times, and that PTA result would identify the ability for the in-service and the sync date to align with that COD going forward. If for whatever reason the PTO and the CAISO determined that the ISD and sync could not align with that COD, material modification assessment request or MMA request could be submitted to further evaluate the alignment or shift, if you will, of the ISD and sync date. So specific to the tariff language being proposed, the CAISO is adding a sentence to 8.9.2.2 of Appendix DD to clarify the alignment rights for specifically Group 3 projects. And then we'll further look at the BPM language around this topic as a whole to ensure what I just said and what we proposed in the paper align with the BPM language, which further then aligns with the Appendix DD and tariff language. Okay, I'll pause there for questions. I see Susan and Gary have their hands raised.
Yes. Unmuting Susan's line now. Please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, Jason. Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. I guess I'm still a little confused about this, so let me ask a few questions. First of all, I know there's this PTA section. Are you saying that the Group 3 projects should use, or all projects should use this PTA to do an alignment? I mean, should that be just Group 3 projects? Should all projects be using that particular tariff provision? Is that what you're suggesting?
That is what I'm suggesting. So all projects can use that. So I would say if the only request being had is the extension of the or I should say alignment of the COD with the PPA, all projects can use the permissible technological advancement mechanism.
Okay, then I would suggest that in section 8.9.2.2, you say that, where you're talking about that there are COD alignments for Group 3 and other projects, and you say, and those should be done per GitApp section 6.7.2.4, because otherwise there's no way to really tie those things together. So I think it would make sense to.
Yeah,
Okay, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, sorry, Susan, I didn't interrupt you. In the final proposal paper, we did reference 6.7.5, which identifies the right for projects to align COD with PPA.
Right.
But we didn't specifically reference the PTA as the mechanism to do that. So
I think that would be helpful.
Maybe we'll take this back to Bill. Yeah, maybe in 6.7.5 we refer to 6.7.2.4 as the mechanism to apply that.
You got to go from one to the other to the other. If there's any way to streamline that, that would be good too. But yeah, at least if you had whatever the final thing is that you want first of all, clarify everyone should use this, and then tell people which one it's supposed to be. That would be helpful.
Yep, understandable. Certainly, we'll look at that.
Okay, and then let me just ask this question about the COD being automatically aligned. But if the initial sync date and the in-service date are not aligned, well, let's say you get a PPA that is 2 years later, and so you're aligning your COD with the PPA, but somehow you still have to have an in-service. I can see where you can say you might still have to pay for the upgrades that other people need, even though you're postponing. That I understand, because that makes sense. But to say that you have to sync to the grid 2 years earlier than you actually need to be there, that actually doesn't really make logical sense.
Yeah. Very much understand your point, Susan. So that's the point of the PTA. The PTA is intended to be a quick, non-study, non-evaluation review of a very slight modification to the project. And in this case, the COD can push out relatively straightforward in the event that there is a further evaluation of the in-service date or sync because of those shared upgrades or because of another situation or scenario. That's where we say a material modification request would then fulfill that further evaluation. So
do you have to do a material modification request I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead. Let me let you finish.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Good clarification. So I see where you're going. So no, your initial request can be, to your initial PTA request can say, we request to adjust the COD, the sync, and the in-service date. The result of the PTA will say, we approve the COD, however, there are further impacts that need to be evaluated to the in-service and sync dates, therefore a material modification assessment request would be necessary.
Okay, so you would have to put in this request, and then you might have to put in another request on top. I guess is there some reason why you can't just do all of this through an MMA request? I mean, it just seems, and then if they didn't have to study it, they could just say, well, we don't have to study it. So is it possible to do this just through a regular MMA request instead of having to use this totally separate PTA mechanism?
Yes, that's an option that the customer would have. And in fact, going back to what you referenced before, that's why we didn't reference the PTA, because really the customer has the option to submit a material modification assessment if they want to go down that avenue, or a PTA if that's the shorter mechanism that they believe would satisfy their business need.
Okay, and then it's just not clear why you have two mechanisms to do the same thing, pretty much. And so, I mean, a COD alignment, if you're going more than, a year out or something, it seems ridiculous to have to sync to the grid and just sit around for a year before you declare COD. And I'm not really sure how that even helps the customer to do that, to be in test mode for a year or more. That doesn't really make sense. And it's also not clear why you need two separate tariff provisions. So maybe you could take that back. I know we've gone back and forth about this a little bit, and I appreciate that, but I'm still having trouble understanding this idea that there's now this separate mechanism, but it only gets you possibly part of what you need. And if you're really doing an alignment, you really need it all. You can't just do the COD by itself. Usually isn't going to get you very much. And I don't think the CAISO wants units to sit around for a year or two in test mode either. That just seems counterproductive somehow. So anyway, if you could just give this one one more round of thought here, about the logic of it, I think that would be helpful. You could always, you know, if you put in an MMA request, the CAISO could also always approve the COD and the COD change, and then if they had to do a study for the other part, do the other part. But to do, anyway, give it another thought, because I'm having a little trouble connecting the dots on this one still.
Yeah, I don't want to keep beating it up, but I think the final thing I would say is, you know, based on the position, if you will, of the project relative to the PTO and what the PTO has started as far as design work and construction and procurement of equipment and so forth, right? The business, or I should say the generator of the project, can make a business decision and we'll have to evaluate, you know, which mechanism do we seek here? Do we seek a PTA because we know for certain that the PTO has not started any design or construction work, and therefore we have a better likelihood of the ISD and sync being approved? Or has the PTO commenced design and construction work where they might actually decline the ISD and sync extension, if you will? And if the latter is the case, then the MMA is the call that's made to seek that COD, ISD, and I'm sorry, let me say that again. The MMA is the mechanism to seek the COD, sync, and ISD all in one shot. So it's really a business decision on the customer side to decide, you know, where are we at commercially, where are we at with development with the PTO, and which mechanism should we go down, right? We want to offer an easy route, the PTA, if the business or the customer thinks that's the right mechanism, or a more detailed approach, MMA, if the project is further down the line. So I'll kind of leave that with you as a deeper explanation and option for the customer.
Okay, well then, is the PTA, is there a time limit for, like, the MMA request is at least the target time is, I know it takes longer sometimes, but the target time is 45 days. Is there a response time for a PTA that somehow makes this more streamlined?
I think I don't have it in front of me, but I do believe the timeline for a PTA response is 30 days.
Okay. Okay.
It does not require an evaluation. Go ahead, Susan.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, so I guess at a minimum, if you could just do the cross references to what you would do when and how, that you could do it with a COD, you know, clarify in 8.9.2.2 or 2 or 3 references after that, whatever you're going to do, that somehow clarify that there are 2 different mechanisms to do an alignment, and one versus the other. What would you do? You know, what do you get from doing one, and what do you get from doing the other? Somehow that needs to. It's just not really clear. So, and again, I do question why you need even 2 mechanisms. But if the target for one is 45 days and the target for one is 30 days, I'm not saying that never makes a difference, but that's a pretty small difference.
Yeah, the deeper side of that is the level of evaluation between the 2 processes. So certainly understand your point. Let's keep moving through the conversation or through the topics. I think what we'll see here is we'll continue with the tariff language as we propose, but then in the BPM change management process, we'll provide these clarifications, as in, in reference to the tariff language, we'll put in some scenarios where the customer would choose either the PTA or the MMA and provide those options, if you will, in the BPM rather than the tariff.
Okay, and it would be helpful in 8.9.2.2 or, again, some reference 2 or 3 down that even mention the PTA as being the mechanism for that COD or a mechanism for that COD extension. Otherwise, it's not, I know you and I talked about this a little bit, and this PTA thing, I certainly have, done a lot of work in the tariff, and I never even thought about this as this is the mechanism you use for a COD alignment. So it'd be good to have a reference here somewhere, even in the tariff language.
Okay, sounds good. We'll take that back. We'll move Bill Weaver into that and figure out if and how that would be appropriate.
Okay, really appreciate it. Thanks, Jason.
Sure. Thanks, Susan. All right, we can move on to Gary Holdsworth.
Sure. Your line has been unmuted. Please go ahead.
It's like Gary got muted again by accident.
Yes,
okay.
Please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
I think I'm on, right? You can hear me?
You're on. Hi, Gary.
Okay, hi. This is just a clarification. Sorry, I didn't read the whole paper. In relation to the PPA being executed, is the standard to be executed or executed and approved on the PPA?
It's executed and regulatory approved.
Okay.
Or regulator approved.
Great. That's good. That's what I was curious about. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thanks, Gary. Any other questions there?
I do not see any further callers in the queue as of now.
All right. Just a quick note before I keep going. Susan, Gary, your hands are still raised, so maybe we take those down just for the time being. Great. Thank you. Okay, moving on. So allowing projects to convert to 100% storage, currently the tariff prohibits a complete conversion from one technology to a battery storage system. Big picture view, CAISO is proposing to remove that prohibition and allow projects to convert up to 100% storage from any technology via a material modification assessment, a post-COD modification request, or a repower request. Vistra did support this and asked the CAISO to clarify, but by whole conversion, we actually mean that a project or a generating facility can convert up to a full capacity of a generating facility. So with that, we did clarify the tariff language proposed in the final paper to be more specific to that language and that request. And we just want to be clear here that the generating facility can request to convert to storage. However, it must maintain and meet the requirements of the total capability and electrical characteristics remain substantially unchanged, as well as no impact to cost or timing of the interconnection request or other interconnection requests with a later queue priority date. So if in the event any of those are material impacts, then a study request would be required for that conversion. I'll pause there for questions. Susan, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Yeah. Hi. I want clarification and just two clarification questions. The requirement for the repowering or post-COD, that second bullet there, is that also the case once you sign the GIA? Isn't that also once you sign the GIA that the total capability and electrical characteristics have to remain unchanged? It's not just repowering or post-COD, isn't it? Even pre-COD after you sign the GIA?
That's correct, actually, for all modification requests, so long as the electrical characteristics are unchanged or substantially unchanged.
But
okay,
Susan,
I thought the third one. Yeah, go ahead, Deb. Sorry.
I was going to say that to the extent that the project has not been built yet and it's still under Appendix DD, in addition to this, it has to make sure that the cost and timing do not impact any other queued projects. So I think there's two pieces of requirements on the projects that are in the queue versus the projects that are adding storage as a post-COD modification. Only has the electrical characteristics and total capability, if that helps.
I don't know, but let me try it. So once, if a project is signed a GIA, but they are not built yet, so they are still technically in the queue, then are you saying the second paragraph and the third paragraph both apply?
Yes.
Okay, but if they have not signed a GIA and they're in the queue, only the third paragraph applies.
No, because the second paragraph is fundamental to whether it's going to be material or not.
Okay, so the second paragraph applies at any time, including when after they signed a GIA, before they sign a GIA, if they're in the queue. It's not just repowering or post-COD. You're saying the second paragraph applies to all modification requests of this type.
Yeah, that's in essence the scope of the project. The scope of the project can't substantially change because then it ends up that what's been studied is inconsistent with what the project is trying to build going forward.
Okay, that should be clear because this looks like it says only for repowerings or post-COD, but you're saying it actually applies to all of these kind of modification requests. So that should be clear. And then the third paragraph applies only if they are in the queue but have not yet signed a GIA. Is that right?
No, paragraph 3 applies to the extent that they are in the queue and have not achieved their COD.
Okay, all right. Anyway, it would be good to make sure this is all clear in the tariff language. I'm not sure it is exactly the way it is right now. Anyway, and I guess my other clarification question was in the proposal, and at least the last version, and I believe it's in this one too, but not as clearly in this one. There was a differentiation between changing from an asynchronous technology to storage versus a synchronous technology to storage, and the first one was more of a yes, you can do that. The second one, it seemed like there was a problem with the second one where you probably couldn't, and so. And I thought there might be, since you've clarified that earlier, I thought that might show up in the tariff language, but I didn't see it.
Yeah, Susan, this is Jason again. So upon further language evaluation, we didn't feel it appropriate to segregate the two between what may or may not occur. More or less the first asynchronous to batteries, there's a higher likelihood, or I guess there's a really low likelihood that there would be any electrical characteristic impacts if you're converting from asynchronous to synchronous. And then there's a higher likelihood that when you're converting from synchronous to an asynchronous battery system, that there might be greater electrical characteristic impacts on that change. And so rather than segregating the two, we just said, look, if there are electrical characteristic impacts identified in the evaluation, then a study would be required. So the likelihood of asynchronous to battery is low, while synchronous to asynchronous is high. We just kind of lumped those together, if you will, and allowed all projects to apply for that request, and we would evaluate it accordingly.
Is that because if you have a synchronous technology that you're looking to convert, that maybe you might include mitigation in your request, and that might make it potentially be able to pass? If, let's say, if it's short circuit duty or some other issue that you're concerned, something like that you'd be concerned about?
I got to be honest, I'm not sure I followed exactly what you meant by that question. So maybe, okay, Deb, thanks.
All right. So, okay. Well, I think it would be helpful. I mean, I don't think you have to do it in the tariff language, but it would probably be helpful to go into that a little more in the BPMs when we get to it.
Sure. I took a note down. So yeah, we'll take that back before we publish anything, and then we'll certainly look at that in the tariff or the BPM change management process. Thanks,
okay.
Susan.
All right. Great. Thank you.
Okay, moving on. So there are two topics for Appendix U. I'm going to cover both of them quickly, and then I'll open for questions. The first one is respective to the modifications part of Appendix U. The Section 4.4 applies to serial projects modification requests. And given the evolution of our existing Q cluster study process modification processes, Section 4.4 is now inconsistent with Section 4.4.6, and we're proposing to delete 4.4.4 of Appendix U. We didn't receive any further comments from stakeholders on this topic or the second Appendix U topic. The second Appendix U topic is predicated on a previous study process where we did feasibility, system impact, and facility studies. With the current reassessment process, we determined that some of the Appendix U topics are not necessarily irrelevant, but can shift into the current reevaluation process, and we're proposing here to delete section 6.4 and 7.6 of Appendix U. I'll pause here for Appendix U questions.
As a reminder, if you're connected to the computer audio or use the Call Me feature in WebEx, you may enter the question queue by using the WebEx raise hand icon located just above the chat panel. You'll hear a beep tone when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name and question.
All right, hearing none, I'm going to keep moving. And the last topic is the effective date of the Generator Interconnection Study Process Agreement. So real quickly, the current study process agreement identifies the effective date as the date in which the IR and agreement are submitted to the CAISO. And because not all projects are ultimately deemed complete and move into the validation process, we're proposing to adjust that submitted date to be for the study process agreement to be effective then on the day the package is deemed complete and then moves into the validation process. And just a note here, Vistra did provide their support for this topic, and the language proposed is there on the screen. We'll pause there for any last questions. All right. And then the last slide, just to clarify, the CAISO is not seeking stakeholder comments on this final proposal. Susan, I do want to kind of comment just directly. I have taken a few notes on the considerations that we'll take when we publish the final tariff language and submit to FERC. Also, we'll be reviewing a number of this language in the BPM change management process. So your comments are appreciated. We hear them, and we'll certainly consider them as we finish this initiative up. And I'll pause there. I'm going to hand it back to Jimmy Bishara to close us out. Jimmy, do you want to take over from here?
Thanks a lot, Jason. There's a lot of information, very well done, fielding it, the questions and going over everything. And thank you so much, Susan, for the feedback. We always want to know how we can better streamline things and make things more clear. And so we appreciate all of that. And I hope Jason's answers were sufficient for now. So as mentioned, this is the final proposal, folks. We will incorporate what verbal feedback we heard today into the board documents. So you can please look out for this to go to the December board. You can look out for the formal notice on that. And any further questions, as you can see, you can please contact Jason Foster at jlfoster@caiso.com. This was recorded again, and it will be posted with the meeting material along with everything else. And with that, we do have some time, so have a great rest of your day, folks.